The chamber of resonant light was not merely a room. It was a testament to the supreme arrogance of the Ethelgard ascendancy, a sprawling expanse of crystalline architecture where the walls themselves seemed to hum with the captured energy of 1,000 conquered stars. Here, beneath the vaulted ceiling that mimicked the swirling nebula of the core systems, the High Council gathered not in fear, but in a state of bemused irritation, their elongated, luminescent forms casting soft, iridescent shadows against the polished floor. The air tasted of ozone and expensive incense, a sensory blend designed to elevate the mind above the base concerns of biological existence, reinforcing the belief that the Ethelgard were the apex of evolution, the curators of the galaxy's aesthetic and martial destiny. High Archon Vales sat upon the throne of Prism, his fingers drumming idly on the armrest, a gesture that sent ripples of light cascading through the material of the chair, signaling his growing impatience with the trivial matter at hand. Before him, suspended in the center of the chamber within a massive holographic containment field, was a granular, high-resolution image of the intruder, a vessel so hideously utilitarian, so devoid of grace or symmetry, that a ripple of suppressed laughter had already circulated through the assembled counselors when it first appeared. It was a dark, jagged block of metal, scarred by cosmic dust and seemingly welded together from the refuse of a dead shipyard, lacking the sleek, fluid curves of Ethelgard cruisers or the organic majesty of the biofleets. It was a brick thrown through the window of a cathedral, an insult to the very concept of starfaring engineering. "It is motionless," Vales observed, his voice a melodic chime that resonated from the crystals embedded in his throat, carrying a tone of dismissive boredom that echoed through the vast hall. "It sits upon the border of the 9th sector like a piece of drift slag, ignoring our hails, ignoring the standard protocols of traversal, and most offensively, ignoring the visual grandeur of the blockade we have assembled to greet it." He gestured lazily with one slender hand, causing the hologram to rotate, revealing the exposed piping and the thick, brutalist armor plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Tell me, Fleetmaster Kalen, are we certain this is a flagship? Are we certain this is not merely a waste disposal barge that has suffered a navigational error and drifted into our sovereign space?" The reports from the Terran Diplomatic Corps promised a demonstration of their finest capabilities, yet they send us this monument to incompetence. It mocks the very sanctity of this council. Fleetmaster Kalen, standing rigid in his ceremonial armor of woven glass and energized plasma, bowed low, though the glint in his multifaceted eyes betrayed a shared sense of ridicule. "My Archon, the sensors confirm it is indeed the vessel designated the Weight of Atlas. It arrived via a crude subspace tier, not the elegant slipstreams we utilize, but a violent, tearing rupture that destabilized the local gravity well for several microcycles. It is powered by a reactor signature we cannot fully classify, something dense and dangerously radioactive, yet it emits no shield harmonics. It is a naked hull in the void. The Terrans claim it is their primary projection of power, yet it carries no visible weapon ports, no lance batteries, and its engines are currently cold. It is, by every metric of civilized warfare, a target drone waiting to be vaporized. I suspect they are mocking us, testing our patience to see if we will deign to destroy something so pathetic." A soft, chittering sound emerged from the shadowed alcove to the left of the throne, where Ambassador Thrax of the Kyloric Union sat observing the proceedings. The Kyloric were an ancient, crustacean-like species, known for their caution and their extensive libraries of galactic history, and Thrax had been the only voice in the chamber suggesting restraint. He shuffled forward, his heavy carapace scraping softly against the floor, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm of nervous agitation. "High Archon," Thrax rasped, his translator converting the guttural clicks into the smooth Ethelgard tongue, though it could not filter out the undertone of dread. "I would urge caution. The Terrans are difficult to categorize. Their aesthetic is indeed crude, and their diplomacy is often blunt, but they survived the Veloxian purges not by fleeing, but by enduring. A species that names a ship the Weight of Atlas is not making a joke. In their mythology, Atlas was a titan condemned to hold up the sky for eternity. They do not name their vessels after predators or storms, as you do. They name them after burdens. If this ship has no shields, it is not because they forgot them. It is because they do not believe they need them. To mock the silence of a predator before it strikes is the last mistake of the prey." Valey's laughed, a sound like shattering glass that signaled the other counselors to join in, filling the chamber with a chorus of musical derision. You see shadows where there are only ineptitudes, Thrax. The caloric have always been frightened of the dark. Look at it. It is a box. It is a flying coffin. We have the Solarian armada stationed at the Vector, ships that are works of art, armed with the photonic lances that cleaved the moons of Zaros. And you worry about a metal box. Valey stood, his robes flowing like liquid light around him, his stature commanding the room. We have tolerated the Terran expansion because they occupied systems no one desired, but now they encroach upon the sacred expanses. They send this ugliness to our doorstep. If they will not answer our hails, if they will not respect the aesthetic purity of the ascendancy, then we shall use this atlas for target practice. Let the galaxy see that ugliness is a crime punishable by annihilation. He turned his gaze back to the Fleetmaster. Kalen, order the Sword of Radiance to fire a single warning shot across its bow. If it does not retreat, turn it into dust. The command was given, and the holographic display shifted to a tactical view, showing the majestic, needle-like silhouette of the Sword of Radiance, the pride of the Ethelgard fleet, maneuvering with fluid grace toward the silent, hulking block of the Terran ship. The contrast was stark. One vessel was a masterpiece of flowing lines and golden energy fields, a ship designed to inspire awe before it dealt death. The other was a monolith of silence, absorbing the starlight, sitting in the void like a hole in the universe. The tension in the council chamber was not of fear, but of anticipation, the way a crowd watches an executioner raise the axe. They expected a spectacle. They expected the Terran ship to panic, to flare its clumsy engines, to beg for mercy. But the weight of Atlas did nothing. It hung there, absolute and immovable, as the Ethelgard cruiser charged its primary weapon, the lance of focused light growing brighter than the local star, a beacon of destruction that promised to scour the offending metal from the sky. On the bridge of the Sword of Radiance, Captain Ilian watched the main view screen with a sneer of professional disdain, his fingers hovering over the firing interface as he adjusted the yield of the photonic lance to a fraction of its full power, enough to cripple the Terran vessel without instantly vaporizing it. For the High Archon desired a show, not a mere deletion. "Target lock established," his gunnery officer reported, the voice dripping with the same arrogance that permeated the entire empire. "The Terran vessel is scanning us, Captain. Active ping. It feels strange. The sensors are reporting a mass reading that fluctuates. One moment it reads as standard durasteel, the next it reads as infinite. It must be a glitch in their jamming technology, primitive countermeasures." Ilian waved the concern away. "They are trying to confuse our targeting computers with noise, typical scavenger tactics, fire the warning shot, sever their port engine nacelle. Let them drift in the dark until they learn to bow." The lance fired. A beam of pure, coherent light, hot enough to boil the oceans of a small world, erupted from the prow of the Sword of Radiance, crossing the distance between the two ships in a fraction of a second. The Council watched in the chamber of resonant light, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the satisfying flare of debris. The beam struck the flank of the weight of Atlas. And then it vanished. There was no explosion. There was no shield flare. The beam simply terminated against the dark hull of the Terran ship as if it had been swallowed. The black metal did not glow. It did not melt. It drank the energy. For a long, terrible moment, silence reigned in the tactical display and in the council chamber. The beam continued to pour into the ship, gigawatts of destructive power flowing into the blocky silhouette, and nothing happened. The weight of Atlas remained motionless, dark, and utterly indifferent. "Report," Valey snapped, his amusement flickering into confusion. "Why is it not burning? Did the shot miss?" "Direct hit High Archon," Kalen stammered, his hands flying across his control console, the light in his eyes dimming with bewilderment. "The energy is gone. The sensors show zero thermal bloom on the target. It's as if the energy ceased to exist the moment it touched the hull. Wait, the Terran ship is hailing us now, audio only, wideband transmission on all frequencies." "Put it through," Valey's ordered, sitting back down, his posture stiffening. "Let us hear their begging." The voice that filled the immaculate crystalline chamber was not the high-pitched plea of a terrified captain, nor the aggressive bark of a warrior. It was a voice of profound, weary calm, sounding as though it came from the bottom of a deep well, heavy with the weight of stone and time. "This is heavy-tow vessel Atlas, attached to the Terran Engineering Corps. We registered a thermal spike on our port containment wall. You are firing upon a Class 10 hazard vehicle. We are currently stabilizing a payload. We request you cease fire immediately. If you destabilize the payload, we cannot guarantee the integrity of your local spacetime. This is your only warning. Do not impede. The message ended with a static click. Valey stared at the hologram, his face flushing with a violet hue of rage. A tow vessel? They send a tow truck to insult the Ethelgard ascendancy, and they dare to threaten us with hazard. They are mocking us to our faces. They absorb one shot with some trick of absorption plating and think they are gods. He stood up, his voice rising to a shriek that caused the crystals in the walls to vibrate sympathetically. Destroy it. All ships, full intensity. Vaporize that insult. Erase it from the stars. Thrax, the Kyloric ambassador, recoiled, his internal instincts screaming a warning that transcended politics. High Archon, stop. They said stabilizing a payload. They said hazard. The human voice, it lacked deception. It lacked fear. That is the voice of a being dealing with forces you do not understand. Call back the fleet. Silence, creature, Valey's roared. Kalen, execute the order. All batteries, fire. In the void, the Ethelgard Armada, a collection of the most beautiful warships ever constructed, maneuvered into a firing crescent. Dozens of photonic lances, plasma torpedoes, and gravity shear missiles were unleashed in a singular, blinding volley. The sheer output of energy turned the darkness of space into a blinding white supernova, a storm of destruction focused entirely on the small, ugly cube that sat motionless in the center. The council cheered. It was a display of overwhelming superiority. Nothing could survive such a barrage. The view screen washed out in static and white light, the sensors blinded by the intensity of the attack. As the light faded, the council leaned forward, expecting to see drifting dust. The weight of Atlas was still there. But it had changed. The blocky hull had split open along the center seams, shifting and sliding with the heavy, grinding grace of tectonic plates. The darkness of the ship seemed to have expanded, bleeding out into the surrounding space like ink in water. And from the center of the open hull, a single pulsating sphere of absolute nothingness was visible, a black hole, no larger than an apple, suspended in a magnetic lattice of terrifying complexity. Energy absorption limits reached, the calm human voice returned, echoing through the silent council chamber. Hull integrity compromised. Passive containment is no longer viable. Initiating active defense protocols, switching to inertial negation. We are venting the excess energy. Stand by. On the screen, the weight of Atlas did not fire a gun. It did not launch a missile. Instead, the sphere in its center pulsed. A wave of distortion rippled out from the ship, not an explosion, but a distortion of space itself. It moved slowly, terrifyingly slowly, expanding like a bubble. The first Ethelgard frigate, the Lancer's Pride, was caught in the ripple. It did not explode. It simply stopped being a ship. The beautiful crystalline hull shattered into its constituent atoms, unspooling like a thread pulled from a garment. The crew, the weapons, the engines, they were dismantled at the molecular level, turned into a cloud of glittering dust that drifted harmlessly away. The ripple continued, hitting the heavy cruisers next. The massive shields of the Ethelgard, designed to stop energy weapons, were useless against a weapon that rewrote the local laws of physics. The shields flickered and died, and the ships crumpled inward, imploding into spheres of scrap metal before disintegrating entirely. Panic erupted in the council chamber. The cheers turned to screams of disbelief. Fleetmaster Kalen fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head as he watched his magnificent fleet, the pinnacle of Ethelgard civilization, being wiped away by a gentle wave of silence. They are not fighting us, he whispered, his voice trembling. They are just pushing us away. That is not a weapon. That is a navigational deflector. By the light, what kind of power allows a ship to use a gravitational singularity as a shield? Cease fire, Valey screamed, his arrogance shattered into a million terrified fragments. Tell them we surrender, tell them to stop the wave. But the wave had already dissipated. Half the fleet was gone, simply gone, converted into harmless background radiation. The remaining ships, including the Sword of Radiance, were drifting dead in space, their systems overloaded by the sheer gravitational stress of the event. The weight of Atlas began to close its hull plates, the grinding metal sound vibrating THR. All the sensors of the surviving ships, a sound like a beast returning to slumber. Correction, the human voice came again. Active defense cycle complete. Excess energy vented. We are resuming our trajectory. We advise you to clear the navigational lane. The wake of our payload is significant. The transmission cut. The weight of Atlas turned, its thrusters, massive, ugly cones of exhaust, flaring with a dirty blue light, and it began to move. But it was what it was towing that made the High Archon's blood run cold. As the ship moved, the sensors finally cleared enough to see the tether trailing behind it, a tether made of magnetic fields and hard light, stretching back into the subspace tier from which the ship had emerged. And pulling out of the tier, dragged by the ugly little ship, was something massive. It was a shard of a neutron star. A fragment of dying stellar matter, incredibly dense, pulsing with enough radiation to sterilize a sector, wrapped in a containment cage that defied all Ethelgard understanding of engineering. The Atlas was not a warship. It was a tugboat, and it was towing a piece of a star that weighed more than the entire Ethelgard Empire combined. Ambassador Thrax let out a long, shuddering breath. "They mocked it," he whispered, looking at the pale, trembling form of the High Archon. "You mocked it because it was ugly. You mocked it because it was a box. You did not understand that to build a box that can hold a star, you do not need art. You need absolute mastery of the universe." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sobbing of the Fleetmaster. The Ethelgard had not been defeated by a fleet of warriors. They had been swatted aside by a worker bee because they were in the way. Days passed before the shock subsided enough for the Ethelgard to attempt communication again. The humiliation was total. The footage of the Atlas ignoring their best weapons and dismantling their fleet with a passive defense field had been broadcast across the galaxy. The ugliness of humanity was no longer a joke. It was a terrifying aesthetic of function over form. But with the humiliation came a desperate curiosity, fueled by fear. If a mere tugboat could do that, what could a warship do? And more importantly, why were they towing a neutron star fragment through civilized space? A diplomatic shuttle, stripped of all weapons and bearing the codes of absolute surrender, was dispatched to the coordinates where the Atlas had come to a halt, deep in a lifeless system on the edge of the sector. High Archon Vales refused to go, hiding in his palace, his spirit broken. It was Fleetmaster Kalen, stripped of his rank and humbled, who led the delegation, accompanied by Ambassador Thrax. They docked with the Atlas. The interior of the human ship was as brutal as the exterior. There were no gravity lifts, only ladders. No holographic art, only warning stripes and exposed conduit. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, machine oil, and coffee. They were led by a human marine in powered armor, bulky, scratched, and terrifyingly silent, to the bridge. Admiral Vance stood by the viewport, looking out at the glowing, captive starshard trailing behind his ship. He was a man of 60, with gray hair cut short and a face lined with the stress of high-gravity maneuvers. He wore a simple jumpsuit with a patch that read Terran Engineering Corps, Hazmat Division. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply turned and looked at the aliens with eyes that held no malice, only a profound exhaustion. Admiral Kalen began, his voice shaking. We have come to offer formally our apologies, and to ask what we are dealing with. We attacked you, we destroyed your silence, and you spared us." Vance sighed, rubbing his eyes. "You didn't spare yourselves, Fleetmaster. You fired enough energy into my hull to overload the buffers. The system vented it automatically. If I hadn't clamped the singularity drive when I did, your whole fleet would have been spaghettified, not just the front line. I'm sorry about your ships, but you were warned. We run hot and we run heavy." "The weapon," Kalen whispered. "It's not a weapon," Vance interrupted, his voice firm. "This is a tow ship. The Atlas is a Class IV stellar mover. We move heavy mass, asteroids, moons, dense stellar remnants. The weapon you saw is our inertial dampener. We have to cancel out the gravity of the things we tow, or we'd never move an inch. When you shot us, the computer shunted the energy into the dampener to keep the payload stable. You essentially attacked a mirror." Thrax stepped forward, his multifaceted eyes wide. "Admiral, with respect, why are you towing a neutron star fragment? The energy required, the risk, it is astronomical. What possible purpose could this serve? Are you building a weapon of mass destruction?" Vance looked at the alien ambassador, and for the first time a look of pity crossed his face. He gestured to the viewport. RT to the starshard pulsing with violent energy. "We aren't building a weapon," Vance said softly. "We're building a wall." The silence in the cramped bridge was absolute. "A wall?" Thrax asked. "Sit down," Vance said, gesturing to a metal bench. "I'm going to show you something that your council is too busy looking at mirrors to see. You people, the Ethelgard, the Kyloric, you live in the core systems. It's bright there. Lots of stars, lots of light. You think the galaxy is a garden, but we humans, we come from the outer rim. We look out into the dark, and we saw it coming." Vance tapped a console. A holographic map appeared, not of the local sector, but of the entire galaxy. And then it zoomed out further to the intergalactic void. We call it the entropy tide, Vance explained, pointing to a region of darkness that seemed to be eating the stars at the edge of the map. It's not an empire, it's not a fleet. It's a breakdown of physical laws, a rupture in the vacuum state. It's been moving toward this galaxy for 1,000 years. It eats matter, energy, light, everything. It unmakes existence. Kalen stared at the map, horror dawning on him. I have seen anomalies in the deep-range scans. We thought they were sensor errors. We ignored them because they were unsightly. Unsightly, Vance repeated with a dry chuckle. Yeah, that's your problem. You ignore the ugly things, we don't. We investigated. We realized that if we didn't stop it, the tide would consume the galaxy in 3 centuries. Conventional weapons don't work on it. You can't shoot physics. So what are you doing? Thrax asked, his voice barely a whisper. We're building a levee, Vance said, pointing to a line of bright dots arranged along the galactic rim. We are towing hyperdense stellar remnants, neutron stars, black holes, white dwarfs, and arranging them in a gravimetric chain. We are weaving a gravity well so deep and so complex that it acts as a breakwater. We are bending space-time to force the tide to flow around our galaxy instead of through it. It's the biggest engineering project in history. We have 10,000 ships like the Atlas, hauling rocks across the void, working in the dark, silent and ugly, so that you people can sit in your glass towers and pretend the universe is safe. Kalen felt a wave of nausea. He looked at the human, this tired, grease-stained worker, and realized the magnitude of his error. The Ethelgard had spent centuries perfecting the art of the hull, the curve of the laser, the beauty of the parade. Meanwhile, humanity had been in the mud, building a dam to hold back the end of the world. You are saving us, Kalen whispered, and we mocked you. We're used to it, Vance shrugged. Humans have always been the ones to do the dirty work. We don't need you to like our ships. We don't need you to admire our aesthetics. We just need you to get out of the way so we can work. But the cost, Thrax murmured. The resources. It's everything we have, Vance admitted. Our economy, our military, our science, it's all dedicated to the wall. That's why we look like scavengers. We don't have time for paint. We don't have resources for golden hulls. Every ounce of metal goes into the containment cages. Every unit of energy goes into the drives. Vance leaned forward, his face hardening. Now I have a schedule to keep. This payload is destabilizing, and I need to get it to the install point in Sector 12 within 3 cycles. Your attack set me back 6 hours. I can make up the time, but I can't afford another interruption. Go back to your council. Tell your Archon that if he wants to help, he can send us raw materials. Heavy metals, fusion cores, shield generators. We'll take anything. If he wants to keep playing dress-up, that's fine too. Just stay out of the shipping lanes. Kalen stood, but he did not bow as a superior to an inferior. He bowed as a student to a master. He placed his hand over his heart, a gesture of deepest respect in Ethelgard culture, usually reserved for the gods. We will not impede you again, Admiral, Kalen said. And I will speak to the council. The Sword of Radiance is gone, but we have resources, we have energy, we have aesthetic clutter that can be melted down. Vance nodded once. Good, we can use the help, dismissed. As the alien shuttle departed, the weight of Atlas began to rev its engines again. The deep, bone-rattling thrum of the Singularity drive vibrated through the hull. On the bridge, Vance watched the aliens leave, then turned back to his navigation console. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a construction worker on a double shift. But as the massive engines flared, dragging the star shard toward the edge of the galaxy, he permitted himself a small, grim smile. They had mocked the stone, but the stone was what held back the flood. Back in the chamber of resonant light, the atmosphere had changed. The humiliation of the defeat had been replaced by a chilling realization. Kalen stood before the council, no longer the proud warrior, but a messenger of a terrible truth. He displayed the data Vance had given him, the map of the entropy tide, the scale of the human engineering project, the sheer, unimaginable weight of the burden the Terrans were carrying. They are not conquerors, Kalen told the silent, terrified assembly. They are custodians. While we perfected our reflections, they were reinforcing the foundation of the galaxy. We called them ugly, we called them primitive, but their ugliness is the only thing standing between us and non-existence. High Archon Vales sat on his throne of prism, but the light seemed to have drained from him. He looked at the image of the Atlas on the screen, the blocky, scarred, brutal ship that he had ordered destroyed. He looked at the neutron star it towed, a force of nature harnessed by sheer will and mathematics. We have been children playing in a garden, Valles whispered, his voice cracking. "While they built the fence to keep out the wolves." "What shall we do, High Archon?" a counselor asked, his voice trembling. Valles looked at his hands, hands that had never held a tool, never known the grime of labor. He looked at the shimmering walls of the chamber. "Tear it down," Valles said softly. "My lords." "Tear it down," Valles roared, standing up. "Strip the gold from the hulls, dismantle the spires. We do not need art, we need alloy, we need power. The Kyloric are right. The Terrans are holding up the sky and their arms are tiring. If we do not help them, the sky falls on us all." He pointed at the image of the Atlas. "Contact Admiral Vance. Tell him the Ethelgard Ascendancy places its entire industrial output at the disposal of the Terran Engineering Corps. Tell him we are ready to get our hands dirty." The message was sent, and out in the deep dark aboard the weight of Atlas, Admiral Vance received it. He read the text, watched the incoming telemetry of Ethelgard supply ships stripping off their ornamental armor to serve as cargo haulers. He watched the elegant, useless ships of the galaxy transform into tools of survival. He didn't cheer, he didn't celebrate, he just keyed the comms to the fleet. "All units, this is Atlas Lead. We have incoming assistance from the locals. Open the formation. Let's get this wall built." The weight of Atlas surged forward, dragging the star, a small, ugly point of darkness leading a galaxy toward the light of survival. And in the wake of its exhaust, the mockery of the galaxy died, replaced by a silence that was not empty, but filled with the heavy, rhythmic thrum of work being done. The galaxy had learned the hardest lesson of all. Beauty is not in the shape of the hull, but in the strength of the shield. And the most beautiful thing in the universe was a dirty, blocky ship that refused to break. Years bled into decades, and the project known as the Great Barrier became the unifying crusade of the galaxy. The cultural shift within the Ethelgard Ascendancy was nothing short of traumatic, yet it was embraced with the fervor of the converted. The chamber of resonant light was stripped of its crystals, which were repurposed for high-yield laser-focusing arrays needed for asteroid mining. The Ethelgard, once obsessed with personal grooming and the play of light on silk, now wore utilitarian encounter suits. They learned the language of efficiency. They learned that a weld did not need to be invisible, it needed to hold. Kalen, once a fleetmaster of war, became a foreman of logistics. He found a strange satisfaction in it. There was honesty in moving mass that war had never provided. In war, you could lie about glory. In engineering, if your calculations were wrong, the bridge collapsed. The physics kept you honest. He worked closely with the humans, often spending weeks aboard the vast mobile shipyards that now dotted the galactic rim. He grew to understand the Terran mindset, a philosophy born of a harsh homeworld where nature was constantly trying to kill them. They didn't fear the entropy tide, they respected it. They treated it like a hurricane, something to be boarded up against. It was on one of these shipyards, the Anvil of Stars, that the next great crisis occurred. The wall was 60% complete. A chain of gravity wells stretched across thousands of light years, a shimmering curtain of distorted space that diverted the encroaching nothingness. But the tide was adapting. It was not sentient, but it was reactive. Where the gravity wall was strongest, the tide pooled, building up pressure, seeking a weak point. And it found one. Sector 88, a region of unstable space known as the Rift of Silence. The local geometry of the universe was thin there, brittle. The humans had delayed reinforcing it because of the inherent danger of working in a zone where the vacuum could spontaneously boil. The tide surged toward it, a massive tendril of non-existence that threatened to punch a hole right through the half-built wall and pour into the galaxy, flanking the defenses. Admiral Vance, now an old man whose body was failing him, presided over the Emergency Council. Humans, Ethelgard, Kyloric, and a dozen other species stood around the tactical table. The mood was grim. "It's going to breach," Vance rasped, his lungs rattling. "We can't get a containment star there in time. The Atlas is 3 weeks out. The tide hits in 2 days." "We can send the fleet," Kalen suggested, though he knew it was futile. "We can try to disrupt the flow with antimatter charges." "Like throwing pebbles at a tsunami," Vance coughed. "No, we need mass, immediate, infinite mass. We need to plug the hole with a singularity right now." Thrax clicked his mandibles. "We have no loose singularities in range. The nearest one is being towed by the Atlas." Vance looked at the map. He looked at the Rift of Silence. And then he looked at Kalen. There was a look in the human's eyes that Kalen had seen only once before, on the day the Atlas had absorbed the fire of an entire fleet. It was the look of a man who had already done the math and accepted the result. "There is one singularity in range," Vance said softly. The room went quiet. They traced Vance's gaze. He wasn't looking at the map coordinates. He was looking at the schematic of the weight of Atlas itself, specifically the drive core. "Admiral," Kalen said, his voice dropping, "the Atlas is powered by a caged micro-singularity. It is the heart of the ship, if you unbottle it." "If we detonate the containment field inside the rift," Vance interrupted, "the expansion of the singularity will be instantaneous. It will create a supermassive gravity well for about 10 minutes before it evaporates due to Hawking radiation. But for those 10 minutes, it will be dense enough to solidify the rift. It will fuse the space-time scar. It will stop the tide." "It will destroy the ship," Thrax whispered, "and the crew." "It's a plug," Vance said, shrugging as if discussing a spare part. "The ship is the plug. I'm the captain. I drive the plug into the hole." "No," Kalen said, slamming his fist on the table. "We cannot accept that sacrifice. The Ethelgard owe you our existence. We will not let you burn yourself on the pyre to save us again." "It's not a debate, Kalen," Vance said, his voice hardening into the iron tone of command. "It's physics. Mass equals safety. I have the mass. I have the vector. You don't have time to argue. Evacuate the sector. I'm taking the Atlas in." The transmission ended. The council was left in silence. But this time, it was not the silence of confusion or mockery. It was the silence of witnessing a sacrament. The weight of Atlas was old. Her hull was pitted, her engines groaned, and her corridors were scarred from decades of hard labor. But as she turned toward the rift of silence, she moved with a purpose that transcended engineering. Vance sat in the command chair alone. He had ordered the crew to the escape pods hours ago. They had refused, of course. Humans were stubborn like that, so he had to lock them out of the bridge and vent the lower decks to force them into the pods. He was the only living thing on board the massive, ugly cube. He watched the rift approach. It looked like a bruise on the face of God, a swirling purple and black vortex where the stars were being eaten. The sensors screamed warnings, structural integrity failing, radiation levels critical. Vance turned them off. He didn't need sensors, he needed to drive. "Ethelgard Control, this is Atlas," Vance said into the comms. "I'm commencing the run. Tell Kalen, tell him to make sure the weld holds. Don't let them use cheap alloy on the memorial." "We hear you, Atlas," Kalen's voice came back, thick with emotion. "The galaxy is watching, witness." Vance pushed the throttle to the maximum. The Atlas shuddered. The singularity drive, pushed beyond its safety limits, began to whine, a sound like a dying star screaming. The ship plunged into the rift. The darkness swallowed the viewports. The reality outside the ship began to dissolve. The metal of the console started to turn into smoke. Vance reached out and placed his hand on the containment release lever. It was a simple red handle, a tool. "Mock this," he whispered. He pulled the lever. The explosion was silent, for there was no air to carry it, but the shockwave was felt in the soul of every being in the sector. The weight of Atlas did not just explode, it unfolded. The micro-singularity, freed from its cage, expanded with the ferocity of a newborn universe. It grabbed the fraying edges of the rift of silence and pulled them together with infinite force. The tide, rushing in to consume the galaxy, slammed into a wall of pure, condensed gravity. It broke. It shattered against the event horizon. The rift sealed, cauterized by the death of the ship. In the Ethelgard observation post, the screens T White then cleared. The rift was gone. In its place was a smooth, scarred patch of space, quiet and stable. The Atlas was gone. Admiral Vance was gone. Kalen stared at the empty space. He felt a grief so profound it threatened to crush him, but beneath the grief was something else. Resolve. He turned to the Ethelgard engineers, who were weeping openly. "Dry your eyes," Kalen barked, his voice echoing the tone Vance used to use. "The wall isn't finished. The Admiral bought us time. He didn't buy us a vacation. Get back to work." The sacrifice of the Atlas changed the galaxy forever. The alliance between the humans, Ethelgard, and Caloric solidified into the union of the barrier. The Ethelgard, once the peacocks of the stars, became the galaxy's premier hullsmiths. They built ships that were ugly, thick, and unbreakable. They carved the story of Vance into the armor plates of their dreadnoughts, not in gold script, but in deep industrial grooves. And high above the galactic plane, at the very center of the completed Great Barrier, they built a monument. It wasn't a statue. It wasn't a spire of crystal. It was a cube, a massive solid block of black iron drifting in the silence. It had no lights, no windows, no weapons. It simply hung there, defying the void. Etched into the side in languages of 100 species was a single warning to the entropy beyond and a promise to the life within. Here stands the weight, do not impede. The aliens had once mocked the human brick. Now they prayed to it, for they understood finally that in a cold, hostile universe, the most beautiful thing was not the light that shone, but the darkness that endured. The humans had not conquered the galaxy, they had simply refused to let it die. And in that refusal, they had taught the stars the meaning of strength. The tide receded, the wall held, and somewhere in the quantum foam, the echo of a grimy tugboat captain laughed, satisfied that the job was done.